Today we'll start our fourth unit by looking at American expansion in the 19th century by considering how the United States acquired Florida from Spain, how the United States resolved a conflict with Great Britain over the Oregon Territory. We'll look at a conflict with Mexico over Texas, and the Mexican War, which is fought over access to the Pacific Ocean. By the end, the United States would encompass almost all of the territory that makes up the United States as we know it today. In this acquisition of land many felt was America's manifest destiny in the 19th century. The impact of this westward expansion would be increased tension between North and South over the expansion of slavery into new territories and more conflict with Native Americans, which will result in their continual loss of land. It's a country on the move. After the Revolutionary War, the United States acquired all of the territory between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. Remember that the British tried to prevent colonial expansion after the French and Indian War through the Proclamation of 1763. But now that the British were gone, the United States had doubled in size by acquiring all of this territory. The country would double in size again in 1803 when Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory from France. And of course, this is known as the Louisiana Purchase. The government encouraged Americans to go west through internal improvements, like the Wilderness Road that was constructed under Daniel Boone's leadership. This would lead to Tennessee and Kentucky becoming states in the 1790s. The government also issued cheap land to farmers to encourage them to move west and to cultivate the land. This westward expansion is part of an 18th century idea known as manifest destiny, which is the belief that Americans possessed a right to possess all land from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific and from Canada to Mexico, and that the right to do this came from God. While the term manifest destiny was not coined until 1845 by John O'Sullivan, this idea has always been part of the American mind. What we see in the 19th century are Americans spreading into all parts of the continent in search of land for improved economic opportunities. The result of this will be canals and railroads that help Americans crisscross the continent and spread the reach of the American government. So whether it's Florida, Oregon, Texas, or California, all of the land acquisitions we will consider today all fall under the banner of manifest destiny. So we'll start with Florida, and this will require us to go back in time just a little bit from the Jackson administration, where we left off last time. By 1819, the Spanish were a very weak power, and they were seeking a way to find a peaceful resolution to the Florida issue with the Americans. The Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819 gives the Americans Florida, and in return, they set a boundary with the United States for New Spain, which you can see there on the western side of the map. This treaty was negotiated by then Secretary of State and future 6th President of the United States, John Quincy Adams. Mexico gained its independence from Spain in 1821, taking over Spanish territory in North America. The Mexican government encouraged Americans to settle in the Texas area by offering large tracts of free land. When too many Americans came into Texas causing overpopulation, Mexico attempted to close its borders to American immigration. That's correct. Mexico felt there were too many Americans immigrating into Mexico, basically the opposite of what we see today along our southern border. In 1836, Texas declared its independence from Mexico, establishing the Republic of Texas, or it was also known as the Lone Star Republic. During the Texas Revolution against Mexico, the famous Battle of the Alamo took place in 1836 at a mission near San Antonio. Texas forces were destroyed by Santa Anna's Mexican forces. Santa Anna's brutality directed at the Texans had led to calls for revenge. During the decisive Battle of San Jacinto, Texas troops called "Remember the Alamo." Texas had earned its independence, and the United States would add Texas as a state in 1846. After the War of 1812, the United States had a legitimate claim to Oregon. But the United States was not the only country claiming this territory. Russia, Britain, and Spain claimed that parts of it was theirs. In 1818, the British and the United States agreed to jointly occupy the territory, with the 49th parallel serving as its boundary. During the presidential campaign of 1844, the Democratic Party and its nominee, James K. Polk, argued that the United States had a right to the entire Oregon Territory, and their rally cry became 54-40 or fight. So the line became the 54-40 line, which meaning that the United States should have all of that territory, and they're willing to fight the British in order to get it. In 1846, the United States would sign a treaty with Britain establishing the 49th parallel as the permanent boundary, with Britain possessing the Northern Territory in Canada and the United States getting the southern section that would eventually become Washington and Oregon State. The new president, James K. Polk, wanted to acquire California in order to gain access to ports along the Pacific Ocean. He offered to buy the territory from Mexico, who refused his offer of $25 million. There was still some ill feelings between Mexico and the United States with regards to Texas. Wanting the territory, Polk instigated the Mexicans by sending American forces into a disputed territory between the Nueces and Rio Grande rivers. Mexico claimed that the border between the two countries was the Nueces River, but the United States claimed that it was the Rio Grande. The president claimed that American blood had been spilt on American soil when American troops died near the Rio Grande. This claim was accepted by most because of the spirit of manifest destiny of the day. But there were some, like an unknown Whig representative from Illinois, who wanted the president to prove exactly where Americans had died, as the government's claims were questionable. The spot resolution by this unknown politician named Abraham Lincoln was ignored by the rest of Congress, who, like the president, wanted to gain the territory and saw war as the only means to accomplish their goal. We'll hear a little bit more about this unknown representative a little bit later. The Mexican War lasted 2 years, with American forces defeating Mexico in 1848. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the war, established the Rio Grande as the border of Texas, and gave the United States the right to purchase California and all of northern Mexico from Mexico for $15 million. This purchase is known as the Mexican Cession. One of the impacts of the war was the amount of land acquired by the United States. It basically increased the size of the United States by a third. The United States acquired territory that would end up making up the states of California, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, parts of Colorado, and New Mexico. The United States now stretched from sea to sea, again, which was the goal of Manifest Destiny. Another impact of the Mexican War was the experience gained by members of the U.S. military. The officers learned lessons in command. Soldiers learned valuable combat experiences. People like Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee, who 13 years later, when the Union falls apart, will be fighting one another in the Civil War. They're a little more prepared for it because of their experience in the Mexican War. Let's close the show by considering the impacts of westward expansion. The goals of Manifest Destiny were accomplished when Florida was acquired through the Adams-Onis Treaty, Texas was acquired following a revolution with Mexico, Oregon was gained through negotiations with Great Britain, and the Mexican Cession was acquired after a war with Mexico. The United States now possess most of what makes up the continental United States today. On the negative side, this westward expansion will make slavery an even more divisive force, as both North and South will argue over where slavery should and should not be permitted in all of this new territory. And Native Americans would continue to be in the way of American expansion, so removal and warfare between the United States and Native Americans will continue. We'll talk about antebellum reform and antebellum economics next time. Until then, good night, Albuquerque.